He shows up as the new kind of financial prodigy, young, awkward, hoodie and shorts in rooms full of suits, talking about changing the world with the calm certainty of someone who thinks math can solve morality. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't become famous by singing or acting. He became famous by making money look like innovation, by turning finance into a story people wanted to believe. That's the key. Today, power is entertainment. Investors want the next savior. Media wants the next genius. The public wants a face that can represent a complicated system. And SBF fit perfectly: smart-sounding, philanthropic branding, a promise of safety in a chaotic crypto world. He wasn't just building a company. He was building inevitability. This episode isn't about dunking on a bad bet after the fact. It's about the mechanism that forms around a genius billionaire, the aura that discourages questions, the momentum that turns growth into identity, and the way attention itself becomes a kind of fuel. When you're treated as exceptional, transparency starts to feel optional because the story is doing the work. And once a story becomes more valuable than the reality underneath it, the fall doesn't happen slowly. It happens like a trapdoor. The question that pulls us forward isn't only, what did he do? It's, how did so many smart people, powerful institutions, and everyday users end up inside the same narrative, right before it swallowed an empire? The rise had everything a modern legend needs: a fast-growing exchange, glossy partnerships, constant interviews, and the feeling that the company was becoming the front door to crypto for the mainstream. The name FTX started showing up everywhere, on sponsorships, on broadcasts, in conversations that treated it as a pillar rather than a gamble. And the founder's image became part of the product: the responsible crypto billionaire, the one who could translate chaos into trust. In those moments, credibility is contagious. Powerful investors signal belief, and belief becomes validation. Boards and advisors add another layer of borrowed authority. The narrative becomes clean: smart founder, world-class team, unstoppable growth. People don't just buy into a platform. They buy into the feeling that they're early to something inevitable. But rapid growth creates a hidden pressure. The story must keep matching the numbers. Expectations don't stay level, they climb. And when the audience gets used to expansion, stability starts to look like decline. That's where the darker side of fame shows up in finance. Not fame for applause, but fame for confidence. If confidence is the asset, doubt becomes the enemy. So the company's pace becomes a requirement, the founder's certainty becomes a performance, and the culture quietly shifts from prove it to don't question it, because questioning threatens the momentum that everyone is now depending on. Because once momentum becomes the foundation, the structure underneath can get dangerously complicated. Instead of simple transparency, you get layers, entities, relationships, internal decision-making that feels too technical for outsiders to challenge. And the myth of genius helps that complexity survive, because people assume complexity equals sophistication, not risk. This is the psychology of fame applied to money. When the world calls you a genius, you can start believing rules are details. Not necessarily because you wake up wanting to commit a crime, but because the incentives around you reward continuing the story at all costs. Growth becomes identity. Being seen as the winner becomes survival. And when your public value depends on confidence, the temptation is to manage perception before you manage reality. Inside that environment, culture matters. A culture of speed can become a culture of shortcuts. A culture of loyalty can become a culture of silence. A culture of brilliance can become a culture where ordinary safeguards feel like distractions. People who raise concerns can be treated as slowing the mission. People who ask for clarity can be treated as not understanding the vision. And for the public watching from the outside, everything still looks shiny until the moment trust breaks. Because financial empires don't usually collapse from one loud explosion. They collapse when confidence evaporates faster than the system can explain itself. And once that happens, the timeline accelerates brutally into withdrawals, panic, and a reality the story can no longer cover. Into the kind of collapse that doesn't give you time to rebrand. When the crisis hit, it moved at internet speed. Rumors, fear, attempted rescues, withdrawals, liquidity questions, and then the hard public confirmation that something fundamental was wrong. What looked stable suddenly looked hollow. And in finance, Perception isn't just reputation, it's oxygen. When oxygen disappears, everything suffocates at once. The fallout wasn't abstract. Customers couldn't access funds. Employees watched a workplace turn into emergency mode. The broader market felt the shockwaves, and an entire sector's credibility took another hit. The same visibility that had helped FTX become mainstream now amplified the disaster globally, minute by minute. And then, in a modern twist, the story became content. The collapse wasn't just reported, it was live-streamed through timelines and reaction videos. People weren't only asking what happened, they were performing their conclusions in real time. The world turned into a jury long before any courtroom did. SBF's public presence in that period added another layer. Attempts to explain, to defend, to control the narrative while the narrative was collapsing. But once trust is broken, words become suspect. Every claim becomes a clip. Every clip becomes proof for someone's side. And while the internet argued, institutions started doing what stories can't: investigating, documenting, and building cases that would decide consequences in the real world, where the rules aren't negotiable. Investigations led to formal charges, and the myth of the untouchable founder collided with the slow machinery of evidence, records, testimony, timelines, and cross-examination. In widely reported proceedings, Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty in U.S. federal court of fraud and related charges connected to the collapse of FTX, an outcome that reframed the entire saga from startup failure to criminal accountability. That verdict completed the anti-hero arc. The savior image didn't just crack, it inverted. The genius narrative became a warning label about hype, about governance, about the danger of confusing confidence with safety. And the damage extended far beyond one individual. Customers, employees, investors, and public trust in a whole industry paid the price. This is why the story sticks. Because it isn't only about crypto. It's about how audiences and institutions crave simple heroes in complex systems, and how that craving can be exploited. When you attach your identity to growth, stopping feels impossible. When you attach your credibility to certainty, admitting doubt feels like death. And in the end, the empire didn't just fall. It got archived, forever searchable, forever referenced, becoming a modern example of how quickly a genius billionaire story can turn into a collapse the world watches like entertainment. The lesson is sharp. Fame and power don't only corrupt, they create an audience. And an audience creates incentive. The more attention you receive, the harder it becomes to slow down, to admit uncertainty, to rebuild the structure instead of protecting the story. When narrative becomes more valuable than reality, the fall isn't if, it's when. The moral isn't never trust innovation. It's never outsource skepticism to charisma. Genius is not a compliance system. Reputation is not risk management. And growth is not proof of safety. If you want fewer collapses like this, the culture has to reward transparency and boring safeguards, not just bold promises. Now I want your take. What do you think fuels these modern financial myths more? Media hype, investor FOMO, or the public's need for a hero? Comment below with your honest answer. If you want more documentary-style stories about the hidden mechanics of fame, money, and power, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next episode, another untouchable success story that looked inevitable until reality collected everything at once.